Welcome to So Lounge. Today we're going to talk about fabric prep. Before you start any project, it's a really good habit to wash your fabric, dry it, and then iron it before you get started with any cutting or marking. By doing this, you're going to get rid of any of the sizing that's in the fabric. And for those of you who don't know, sizing is like a stiffening agent. It's kind of a type of starch that fabric manufacturers apply to fabrics to make them look nice when they're in the fabric store. So it's kind of that extra stiffness. And you want to wash your fabric to get rid of that because it may change the feel of the fabric and the way that the fabric hangs. But then you also want to wash your fabric because your fabric could potentially fade and it could potentially shrink. And you're not going to know that until you wash it. Far better to know at the very beginning before you've done any work on it than after you've finished, put in lots of hours sewing something to have it ruined in the wash. So keep that in mind. That's step number one for fabric prep. Once your fabric is washed, dried, and ironed, the next step is to get your fabric on grain. Now you may be thinking, what does that mean, Toni? I have absolutely no idea. Fabric is woven with two different sets of threads. So there's the lengthwise set of threads, which is called the warp, and then there's the widthwise set of threads, which is called the weft. Now, it is also referred to as the lengthwise grain and the widthwise grain. And to illustrate this, I have pulled some threads on this piece of muslin, which is just a basic plain weave fabric, to show you what I'm talking about. So if you look carefully, this main line going from top to bottom is the warp grain line, which is the lengthwise grain. And then the line going across the middle of the fabric is the weft grain line, which is also called the widthwise grain. So the reason you need to know about these things and make sure your fabric is on grain is because if it's not on grain, once you start washing it or sewing with it, it's going to start getting off grain. So what do I mean by that? If fabric's off grain, it's going to move and it's going to stretch in a different way than the way that the pattern intended the garment to stretch. So, for example, when I started sewing back in the day, nobody told me about this. So one of the very first things I made was a rather hideous A-line skirt with a slit in it, and I just matched up the tops and the sides and thought my fabric looked great, and I cut out my pattern and I made my skirt. And what I didn't realize is that the print of the fabric wasn't printed on the grain of the fabric. So because that was askew a little bit, once I made my skirt and put it on, it started twisting. So I never actually wore this skirt. I mean, aside from the fact it was totally hideous, but because it wasn't comfortable, because I always felt like I was being squeezed, because instead of just hanging straight down, it twisted, and that was very uncomfortable. And I don't want that to happen to you guys, because it's really awful to make something and not be able to wear it because of some minor thing that could have been done at the very beginning. So today I'm going to show you how to get your fabric on grain, and to get started, you need to have whatever fabric you're going to use for your project. It needs to be washed and it needs to be ironed. So doesn't have to be perfect, just has to be ironed decently, okay? This is what we're going to start with, and I am going to show you how to get started. To get started, make sure that your fabric is unfolded so that you just have a single layer of fabric. And then we're going to be working from the side of the fabric, and this is the selvage. So it's that tight part on the edge of the fabric that does not stretch or give in any way. We're going to be cutting across that to go into the fabric. So measure out about 1 inch, and then you can cut on that line under the inch. Or if you don't have a tape measure, use your thumb, which is approximately 1 inch, and then you're going to cut along your thumb, because that's what you're going to grab on with, and you're going to cut across the selvage. So it looks like that. So now that you've got your fabric started, and this is my favorite part, y'all, you're going to tear it across the top of the fabric. Okay, tear it. And you want to keep tearing until you get to the other side. And a little bit more. That's satisfying. this is how much off grain the fabric is. So you can see that the ends are, it's about an inch at each end. Well, it's about an inch and a half. But then through the middle, it gets really narrow. So that's how much the fabric was off grain. It was off grain from the sides, like into the middle. And by tearing this fabric, we're now getting it on grain, meaning that that's the grain line. And it's just the same as if I'd pull threads to make this kind of a grain line. It's the same thing. So you're just ripping it to get it on grain. Now, a word to the wise, this can only be done with plain weave fabric. If you have a twill like denim or chino, or a more complicated fabric like a jacquard or a twill, that is a denser weave, you're not going to be able to rip it across. To get that on grain, you're going to have to pull threads like in this example, which is not fun. But you don't have to worry about that for a while, because plain weave fabrics are awesome for beginners, and you can make all kinds of things with just this basic fabric, and you can tear it until your heart is content. Let's go over to the ironing board, and we're going to iron this out, and then we're going to fold it in half. So I'll show you how to do this next. So we're at the ironing board, and I know y'all have been dying to know what the other side of the sewing room looks like. So this is the opposite wall from the one I usually film against. I've got my iron steaming, as you can see. If your fabric is 100% cotton, then set your iron to cotton, put the steam feature to high, and let's iron this top edge. Now, as you can see, this top edge is kind of curling a little bit. So we want to iron that out and make it lie flat. So it's easier to finish getting our fabric on grain. And use steam where needed to get that edge nice and crisp. Check it out, much better. Next, we're going to match our fabric along the selvage and line it up across the top. And this is just going to make it a little bit easier for us to get things lined up. All right, so this part is going to require pins. I didn't mention that earlier. Go grab some if you don't have them. And what the next step is going to be to pin the selvage together. And you want to make sure this top edge matches across the top. So you don't need a lot of pins. You just want it to hold it so that that top lines up. And you're going to move the fabric around until you can make that happen, which is sometimes easier said than done. And it might take you a little while to do this step, but it will totally be worth it when your end garment fits properly and doesn't shift around on the grain. All right, so I'm going to put a pin here, and then we're going to move down a little bit, put another pin here. Keep going down, a little bit off right here. Then we want to make sure again that it stayed on grain here, so it has. And you're going to continue moving down the side of the fabric and making sure that it matches up. Now, the more I look at this fabric, the more that I think it's something I purchased on an international trip, because it doesn't have any of the usual design markings or copyright information or any of that along the side of it. So we're not sure if this is going to cooperate or not. Sometimes these Handmade, smaller batch textiles are a little bit more fussy about getting on grain. They might take a little bit longer, but we shall see. Okay, so what we're going to do, I'm going to pin some more because it's already starting to move. And the other thing that's a downside about this fabric is that this has been folded in a drawer for many years. And even though I just washed it, it does not want to cooperate. Okay, so we're gonna hold it up. We're gonna shake it a little bit. That looks pretty decent. And then what we're gonna have to do is we're gonna have to get the iron nice and hot, and you're gonna start pushing it towards the center over here. Because this fabric has been folded for so long, it wants to go back to its original fold, which is not on grain. And we've got to get it to stop doing that. So thankfully, because this is cotton, with some elbow grease and some heat, we can make that happen. So you just have to work with your fabric. Now, most of the fabrics you're gonna buy from a store here in the States, any kind of fabric store, unless it's really old fabric and it's been sitting on the bolt a very long time, is probably going to be a little bit easier to get on grain. I will say that a lot of the fabrics I've bought at Joann's recently are not on grain, and you might use as much as 4 inches off the bottom when you try and get your fabric on grain. So you might want to always just buy like an extra 1/4 of a yard to be on the safe side so you don't lose any of the fabric in your garment. Fabric.com is another place I like to shop. Most of their fabrics are very, very close to being on grain, so it's not, you don't lose quite as much fabric. Just to keep that in mind. Okay, other thing to keep in mind, your fabric is hot when you're steaming it. You may have noticed that I jerked my hand away. It's because it was really hot. Okay, so I'm going to keep moving down this fabric, and then we'll regroup once I get to the end. One thing to point out quickly as I'm finishing this up, I noticed this. As you're finishing ironing, the bottom edge is not lining up, and that's totally fine. So don't stress about that. You want the sides to match up, and then you want to press your fabric flat into this fold over here. And if the fold moves, that's fine. And if you look really closely, if you can see that, you can kind of see where the original crease was here and how it's moved over a little bit to get the fabric back on grain. But no worries if it's not even on the bottom, because we're going to be tearing it again so that the whole piece of fabric is for sure on grain. All right, so by now your fabric should be on grain. I'm sure you didn't want to watch 20 minutes of getting this done. It can take some time, so just keep that in mind. Don't get frustrated. And sometimes you might need to iron it from the other side too. So just keep that in mind. And the goal is to press your fabric towards the seam, towards the fold, and to keep the top lined up and the side lined up. So this folded edge is where it's going to move. And if you only pin down halfway, then you can get everything moving towards the bottom, which is totally fine. And it might take you some time, so just be patient. Now, this is more fabric than I need for my project. I just need 1.25 yards, and I believe this is just over 2 yards. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to measure it out, and I'm going to tear it across the grain for the length that I need. Now, because my fabric is all on grain, it should tear on grain, and it should tear perfectly on grain. So I have a exact 1.25 yards, but you're never 100% sure, especially since this is not a commercial fabric. So I'm gonna just be doubly sure, and I'm gonna probably add like an extra inch on the end of it just to be on the safe side. Let's straighten this out over here. And where are my scissors? I don't know where they went. Here they are. Okay. So I've got a yardstick. I got this at Home Depot. I took the time to measure 1/8 of a yard, 1/4, 1/3, 1/2, 3/4, or 2/3 and 3/4, and then that's the end of the yard. Just because that makes things a lot easier. Sometimes people have problems with fractions, and so by doing this, you don't have to be like, oh, 1/8 of an inch is 4.5 inches, 1/8 of a yard, or 1/4 of a yard is 9 inches, or 1/3 of a yard is 12 inches. You don't need to know that. You can just mark it on your yardstick and then it's ready to go. So I'm going to lay this down along the selvage. This is a yard. I think I'm going to use a piece of little pencil here. So you've got a chalk pencil handy. I'm just going to make a little mark here so I keep everything straight. Okay, so that's a yard. And then I'm going to move my yardstick down. So I have 1.25 yards, which would be right here. And then I'm going to add an extra inch just in case there's something still going on with the grain. So put your yardstick aside, and you can unpin the fabric along this side now. Be careful you don't stab yourself. And I left my pincushion over on the ironing board, so really need to be careful. But anyway, okay, I'm going to put these down over here, and I'm going to go back to my mark, which is right here, and I'm going to cut across the selvage. And now I'm going to tear, so wish me luck. Okay, so this is my extra piece that I will not be using for my dress, and I might make a bag with it or something because it would definitely be long enough for that. I'm just going to fold it and put it to the side. And then we've still got our fabric here. It's still pinned across the top, so we know that's on grain. And we're going to lie it down, match up these selvages, and we're going to take a look at the bottom and see how it looks. Oh yeah, hey, look at that. Okay, so it pretty much matches up. Yes. Oops, it's drooping a little. Let me grab that. I'm going to iron this again and make sure it's totally on grain. And if not, if the bottom's uneven, that's okay, once you start laying out your patterns. So that is how you get your fabric on grain. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. It's given you a little bit more clarity. And if you have questions and no one to answer them, check out Let's Talk Sewing for Beginners, hosted by Sew Lounge on Facebook. It's a new group that's interactive, and I'm live every Wednesday at 4:30 Central Standard Time doing tutorials or Q&A. So love to have you join me. There's a link in the comments below. So just click on that, and until then, happy sewing.